past few weeks, we've been talking about how Jesus is difficult, and the problem is that as Christians, we want others to see that following Jesus is awesome, right? Right? Following Jesus is great, right? I mean, that's what we do. And so the problem is that once people are in, then we tell them, by the way, deny yourself and take up your cross. So it's kind of like a bait and switch if we don't really explain that ahead of time. So one of the things we've tried to do here is to be honest as possible about how hard it is to follow Jesus, and how in our culture, fewer and fewer people seem to be truly interested in living the kind of life He intends for us because it's hard. And it takes a lot of work and discipline. And so we want to live lives marked by God's way because Jesus said, narrow is the way. And I want to reach for that, but it's not to earn God's love, but because I know He already loves me, and because I know He loves me, whatever He's teaching me must be best for me. And so we're going to pray, and then we'll get into the heart of the message this morning. God, I can't imagine the burdens, the anxieties, the doubts that may have been dragged through these doors this morning by my friends. So we ask You to clear our minds and make us sharp in our moments together. We want this to be holy ground where we can ask really difficult questions of You and of each other, and more importantly, of ourselves. So as we look at this confrontation of Jesus and those He was dealing with, would You take this story and make it our story? Show us who we are in the story, and take all this information and transform us, because God, we're desperate people. We need to hear from You today. So we trust You, we love You, and we want You to speak to us now very clearly. In Jesus' name, everybody said, amen. Thank you. Excuse me. Mark chapter 3. You can follow along in your insert there. Another time. So just as a note, Jesus had just had a confrontation with some religious leaders called Pharisees, and so they're kind of hanging around the scene, and so they're the them that we're going to come across here in just a second. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched Him closely to see if He would heal him on the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath command comes up over and over again in the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Bible. So the Torah is central to the Jewish people. Can you say the word Torah? I feel like Mr. Rogers. We'll do that a couple times. It's fun. Anyway, in Jesus' day, the goal was to live the Torah. I mean, even Jesus says, I didn't come to get rid of the Torah. I came to show you what it looks like when someone puts these commands on display, when someone really lives them like they're supposed to be. And so the goal was to live the Torah. There's about 613 or so commands. One of them, one of the big ones, was observe the Sabbath. Do not work on the Sabbath day, which raised all kinds of fascinating questions. Because one rabbi might say, hey, this is work and this isn't. And then another rabbi might have a different list, which was considered work and what was not. And so each rabbi's particular set of what you could and couldn't do was called the rabbi's yoke. One rabbi came along one day and said, my yoke is easy. Isn't that interesting? So every rabbi had a yoke, and so when you followed a rabbi, you followed that particular rabbi's list of what you could or couldn't do according to his understanding of the Torah. And so the discussion came, what happens in the law when like the Torah contradicts each other? When a law in the Torah contradicts another in the Torah. And this can happen on occasion when we read through the Scriptures because they seem to contradict each other occasionally. For example, there is a command to save life and to protect life wherever it needs to be saved or protected. And so the question that the rabbis often proposed is, what happens when your donkey falls in a hole on the Sabbath? I'm sure it's a question many of us have pondered on a regular basis. Because if your donkey falls in a hole on the Sabbath, you should do everything you can do to save the life of your donkey, right? But to reach into the hole and pull your donkey out of a hole would be to do work. And so you have the command to protect life and the command to observe the Sabbath. What happens when the two commandments are at the same place and at the same time? And so you have to pick which command, and this is their language, which is weightier, which is lighter. So do you break the Sabbath in order to fulfill this command, or do you do the opposite? And so we have these debates today, and it's simply called ethics, right? Simply like, what do you do when you have two things you're trying to do that contradict or seem to contradict each other? So there were rabbis who said, you don't save life, you always go with not doing work. And then there were other rabbis who said, no, you save life. And so Jesus said, you aren't for the Sabbath, it's for you. And so that's the discussion that Jesus wades into. This is one of the great debates of Jesus' day, an incredibly controversial discussion. Verse 2, some of them were looking, these are the Pharisees again, some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. So the question is, what's Jesus going to do? If he heals the man, he'll be breaking the Sabbath. If he doesn't heal the man, he's not protecting his life because they know he's able to heal him. Verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. So now it's like Jesus is kind of looking for trouble, right? Because he could just kind of quietly go over in the corner and try to be discreet about it. But instead, he's kind of purposely setting up controversy. So he has the man come stand in front of everyone, verse 4. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill. Now, did you catch that? That's like spiritual kung fu. Okay, because the discussion is, are you on this side or this side? Jesus, pick your side. But Jesus has this man stand in the middle and he says, tell me which is better, to do good or to do evil. So he's kind of got them like in a headlock. I mean, what are you going to say? Do evil? No. And so he changes like the framework of the discussion, and he's got them, and they hate it. And so it says, they remained what? But they remained what? Silent. Thank you. I'm just making sure you're with me. They remained silent because they've got their little kingdom, and they've already got they're already using confirmation bias, so they're just not going to take anything he says if it's different from what they already think. And so they're trying to protect that, and Jesus has them in a corner, and they just won't admit it, and they're so hard-hearted and so opposed to Jesus that they won't even answer a basic question, and they're silent. And then the text says, this is my favorite part, he looked around at them in anger. Jesus looks at them and he's angry. And so today I want to talk about a Jesus who gets angry. Now for some of you, the only image of Jesus that you have is maybe like the flannel graph Jesus from Sunday school. You know, he's got long brown, flowing, maybe feathered hair from the 80s. His hair blown. And he's always carrying a little lamb in his arms, I should say. And there's no dirt on his white robe, right? This is the other Jesus. This is the Jesus who gets angry. Now the word here for anger is the Greek word orge. Can you say orge? Okay, it sounds like it's a word that we got the word ogre from. It's not. So that's not helpful to you, but I just thought that was funny. So ogre, orge, anyway, okay. But Aristotle actually talked about this word, so let's talk about somebody who does know something, okay? And he says the etymology of this word comes from an ancient Greek word that means desire mixed with grief. So Jesus clearly wants things to be a certain way. His desire is that they would get it, but they don't. And so he's filled with like this grief, but it's not like sad grief. It's more like they should get this. It's anger. And it's in the aorist tense, which I know you find exciting as I do, but this is crucial because this isn't like a low-grade boiling anger that just sits right below the surface. This isn't like a petty, selfish anger that kind of blows its top at minor offenses. It's an anger that comes on Jesus like in a temporary state. He has it and then it passes. And it's not the kind of anger that he's carrying around, from place to place with a chip on his shoulder. He sees the scene, this injustice, and he's angry. And today I want to trace through anger and talk about a Jesus and a God who get angry. Because throughout the scriptures, we find a divine anger. And we don't always like it, so we kind of downplay this in our theology today. But we do find a God who gets angry at certain times. Now, maybe not as angry as some traditions would have you believe, but that's a whole other discussion. But let's just look for a moment on what this divine anger looks like. Because often in our efforts to articulate a God of love, we leave out a God of wrath and anger and judgment. But I want to present to you this simple idea. If you have a God of love, then you're going to have, at least on occasion, a God who gets angry. And let me just show you why. Look at Amos chapter 5. God is talking to the prophet Amos, to a group of religious people, to Israel, or what's left of them. And he's talking to them about their religious rituals and feasts. So these are people that worship him. They come together and they do these feasts and worship services. And listen to how God's response to their efforts. I despise your religious festivals. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. So this is God speaking to a group of religious people, and he says, I wish you would stop playing your God songs and your gatherings. I hate them. Is God angry here? What is it that has God so upset? Well, in chapter 8, maybe is the shortest way that God articulates this in verse 4. Hear this, he says, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land. So what has God all cranked up? These religious people take advantage of those who don't have as much as they do. Verse 5, saying, when will the new moon be over that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat? Buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. So he's saying, look, you're so obsessed with becoming wealthy that you skimp when you sell to those who are hungry, and you actually take the dirt and you sweep it up with the wheat on the threshing floor, and you sell people wheat mixed with dirt because you know they're hungry and they're going to buy it because they're starving, and you can make money and take advantage of their poverty so you can make even more money. It makes me furious. You say you follow me, but you exploit the needy in your midst, and you take advantage of their situation to make you more money, and I wish you'd stop singing your songs. You make me sick. So it's a God who sees injustice and says, that's wrong and I'm tired of it. And so when we talk about a God who is angry, perhaps we should ask this question. Which is more disturbing, a God who gets angry or a God who can see injustice, abuse, and exploitation and not get angry? A God who can see violence and rape and say it's not a big deal? See, we're disturbed sometimes by a God who gets angry, but I find it far more disturbing if God didn't get angry. So there's a divine anger with Jesus. He sees injustice. This man needs healing, and these super religious guys want to prevent it. It's not right, and he's angry. And so what does his anger lead to? Now, I'm like you. I get angry. You can ask my family. Probably have a short temper, short fuse. And I find anger to be a most puzzling thing. Back in St. Louis, when Reagan was a toddler, so this is before Micah and Aiden were born, she was just 2 or 3 years old. We went to a local high school football game, and when we got back that night to our house in what was presumably a safe neighborhood, there was no crime that I was aware of, I opened the door, and I let my dog out into the backyard while Jennifer and Reagan were still, getting out of the car, and my dog Sheba, in the dark backyard, went ballistic, just like barking, growling, totally uncharacteristic of her. And so I peeked in the backyard, and I saw 3 people dressed in black, and one of them was standing on my air conditioning unit trying to get into the window of my bathroom. And so I yelled, hey, what are you doing? Like I couldn't figure that out. I think I was just like, what do you say when someone's tried, hey, sorry, we're just fixing the unit. They didn't say anything. Instead, they saw me, they jumped down off the unit, they leaped over a short fence, and they started running down the street. And in the heat of the battle, I made a decision. I'm going to chase them. Okay? And so I take off running. Fortunately, it was the little one I saw. And so because I figured at least I had a chance size-wise. But as I'm catching up to the little one, I realize, because I'm just filled with this anger and adrenaline, like, how dare you? And I'm right behind him. And, I'm like about to yell and about to grab him, and I don't really have a plan. What if he has a weapon? I don't have one on me, so it's going to be a really bad situation. And in a flash of a second, this is going through my head, and I'm not really more than 50 yards from the house, and I hear Jennifer yell, stop, stay here. And like a good dog, I stopped, and I stayed right there. And I realized that I never really made sure my family was safe. What if someone had made it inside? What if one of them had circled back and was threatening them? And so in my anger, I didn't think things through, and so I came back, and it turned out everything was fine. They hadn't made it in. They had all departed swiftly. The police came. They didn't find anything, and we never had an issue again. But there's this nuclear force that anger can kick in gear within you. You know what I'm talking about? That when you find yourself angry, you can leap like tall buildings in a single bound. How many of you get angry and you scare yourself? Anybody but me? How many of you get angry and you say things and you think, did I just say that? That's not like me at all. How many of you have gotten so angry that you've broken something? I haven't done that in a while, so bad on you. I'm just joking. No, it's like, I can't believe I just did that. See, if you find someone totally exhausted and depressed and stressed, and you give them something to be angry about, there's this nuclear reaction that can take place inside. And so anger produces like a rocket fuel of energy, and it produces unbelievable adrenaline. And so the question in Mark chapter 3 is, what does Jesus do with his orge? What is the result of his anger? Verse 5. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Jesus' anger leads to healing and restoration. Jesus' anger leads to healing and restoration, to peace and to justice. What does your anger lead to? Does it make the world a better place? Does it bring healing to those who need it? Because Jesus' anger gets channeled into a very specific act of love. See, the problem isn't our anger. The problem is what our anger is towards and then what we do with it. Jesus essentially channels a divine anger and he focuses it, and it brings about an act of healing and restoration. I mean, you can find this divine anger throughout the Scriptures. Galatians is another book that's in the middle of another controversial discussion in the early church. There's a man named Paul. Most of you know who I'm talking about, the Apostle Paul. He's been going from city to city bringing people this message of Jesus. He's telling people about, the grace of God and God's love for them, this message of God, who loves you for who you are, the message of God who loves you, not for what you can do for Him, just or how good you are, but simply because that God made you and values you. And everywhere he went, he had these people that would trail behind him. They were a group of religious people that came from, a similar tradition as Paul in the Jewish tradition, that believed that, like Paul had believed, that God had commanded this man named Abraham to have a son circumcised on the eighth day. And so they saw circumcision as a sign of your covenant with God. And so there were these certain Jewish people who followed the Torah and circumcised their boys at day 8. And so they're going around to the people that Paul had gone to saying, hey, you're not quite in yet. You're not really a follower of God yet. In order to be a Christian, you have to do all this other Jewish stuff. And so, they're going into a village where 40-year-old men have become Christians, and they're saying, have you been circumcised? No. Well, we're going to have to see you at the clinic next week for a little operation. It's like, no, we're not going there, right? But that's essentially what's going on here. Paul is furious that these people are going around saying, Jesus is not enough. You need to do this, and then you'll be good with God. And he launches into this tirade in Galatians in verse 2, and just to kind of give you the preamble to it, it's like, mark my words. Who says that? It's like somebody who's really means something, right? He's kind of getting his anger up. Mark my words. Verse 7, you are running a good race. Who cut in on you, which is actually a play on words, who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? And then verse 12, as for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. Whoa, easy, Paul. Easy, buddy. Is he a little bit angry? Oh, I wish they'd just cut it all off. Wow, he's angry because these people are ruining the good news. And yet what does he do? Notice verse 13. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. Verse 1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. And he goes from city to port to village, and through letters and through stories and through logic, he preaches grace, 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 that God loves you exactly as you are, that in Christ you're loved exactly as you are. And he takes that anger that makes him say, I just wish they'd emasculate themselves, and he channels it into telling the story of Jesus again and again, and he ends up dying because he went to Rome and he won't shut up talking about Jesus, and his anger fuels him to bring freedom and love and truth to as many people who are interested in listening. So what do you love? What do you love? That's a good question to ask, when you're trying to decide your vocation, your calling, your purpose in life. What is it that you like to do? That when you do this, you just feel like you could do it forever? What is it that makes you, what is it that you do that makes you think, I was made for this? I feel God's joy when I do this. That's a good question to ask ourselves. Maybe that's where your calling or your vocation comes from. But I also wonder if there's another question we could ask to get at the answer of what am I supposed to do with my life. Maybe that question will be, what makes you angry? What cranks you up? And maybe your calling is somewhere in that question. What is it that when you see it makes you think, that's wrong? Somebody should do something about that. And maybe the voice of the Almighty is going, it's you. You're the somebody. And we could talk about so many different issues. I just picked a couple material ones because they were easy to find research on. And the reality is the world is improving. I don't know if you know this in terms of like material things, like the statistics I'm going to share with you. Almost all of them have improved over the last 20 years. But there's still so much of a ways to go. I don't think any of these statistics should make us happy. Let me show you some of these. More than 2.5 billion people, over a third of the world, lack basic sanitation facilities. Is that okay? Over 785 million people still use unsafe drinking water. I mean, it's down from 1 billion. That's awesome. But like 785 million people? In southern Sudan, over 5 million Sudanese have no access to schools and health care. Nearly half the world lives on less than $2.50 a day. It used to be $2 a day. Yay, we're making progress. It's $2.50 now. One person told me, well, yeah, they don't work as hard as us. That makes me angry. Now, there are a lot on this next one. I found so many sources, so I had to just kind of give you the range. Around the world, depending on your source, it's somewhere between 58 and 264 million children don't get a basic education. I mean, do you have a sense in which education is good and people should have it? Maybe that's the voice of God saying, let's do something about that. Let's bring that number down. And this might include anything from helping on the other side of the planet, and maybe that's not possible for you, and so maybe it just means driving a couple miles down from here and tutoring someone an hour once a month or being a teacher. I mean, this is not just about some other place. I mean, it's here too. Did you know that every 5 seconds a child under the age of 5 dies of hunger in the world? It used to be like every 3.5 seconds. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Does that make you angry? The leading cause of death for adolescent girls in Africa is childbirth. By a conservative estimate, more than 40 million people in the world are slaves. That's more than any time in our history. So we live in a world where people get angry at things that don't matter. It's like, man, the Wi-Fi's down again. Windstream, Spectrum, they're digging in my yard with that new company. I don't know who it is again. But anyway, it's like people get so frustrated like Wi-Fi. And then they don't get angry about the things that do matter. So perhaps it's time for the Church of Jesus to become angry about the types of things that God becomes angry about. And there are several themes that come up again and again in the Scriptures, and it generally always surrounds justice, compassion, and generosity. I mean, think about the things you get angry about. Are they things that actually matter? And think about the things that you don't get angry about that may in fact be things that matter to God. I mean, just an observation. I mean, fortunately, they won yesterday, but man, we get more angry at UK losing a game than we do about the plight of children caught in abusive homes, don't we? I mean, I've talked to workers in Fayette County, and they have to investigate cases of sexual exploitation. 5-year-olds forced to become objects for people to pay money to have sex with. Does that make you angry? Makes me sick. Maybe the risen Christ is calling you to channel your anger and become a foster parent or adoptive parent. And if that's not possible for whatever reason, maybe you can support someone else who wants to become one or is one. Think about the petty things that we get angry about. If you find yourself on a regular basis while you're purchasing foods or goods, thinking about the help in the restaurant or the store, like, man, they're slow, they're just incompetent, and you find contempt for people who are not able to serve you right, whatever that looks like, perhaps you have a boiling reserve of anger that you carry with you everywhere. Maybe you're looking for a fight because you aren't in one. And so my observation of those that are most engaged with the real needs of a real hurting world have a sense of perspective, and it frees them from like petty, irrational, minor offenses. I mean, it's really hard when you just talked your friend out of ending their life to drive home and get angry at other drivers because you have a sense of what matters and what doesn't. You know, it's hard when a marriage is barely hanging on and you have an opportunity to beg these people to reconsider their vows. It's hard to get angry about this or that. But what you find with Jesus is that he doesn't spend much time complaining about the problems. He turns his focus from these people who he gets angry with, who just don't get it. He doesn't that'd have been like a fun thing to do, right? Maybe, I don't know. But he puts it on this man who needs healing. And so we live in a culture that gets angry about things that don't matter, and we don't get angry about things that matter to God. Do you, on a regular basis, do you fly off the handle at tiny things that aren't a big deal, and you think, why am I so angry? I do. Maybe we should ask, your roommate or your spouse or your kids or your coworkers, have you in the last week or month had an odd outburst of anger and you're still trying to figure out where it came from? Maybe it's because you were made for a giant purpose. And you have this thing that churns inside of you and you haven't channeled it to acts of healing and restoration. A few years ago, they did a study asking non-Christian people, what do you think when you hear the word Christian? And just given a blank sheet of paper, the number one thing that people said is that Christians hate gays. That makes me angry. Not the people who wrote the answer, for the fact that they would have that perception. That makes me angry at the church, that we've given that perception. And I realize that as I've been sorting through this anger, that much of my own energies and what I've given my life to is driven by a sense of divine anger, driven by, I'm sick and tired of people speaking for Jesus who have missed the point. And I realize that drives me in ways that I've never been aware of, so hopefully it brings about healing and restoration. Because I want, our kids to grow up in a world where they say Christian, they're given a blank piece of paper and they write love, compassion, acceptance, humility, creative, innovation. I want to help change the adjectives. I want my kids to grow up in a world where people are true to the teachings of Jesus in such a way that you can't deny his compelling force. And I realize in my life there is this divine anger that drives me, and I just have to channel it more often. And you're no different. You have the same kinds of things, of stuff that churns within you. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? Because we all have the same choices. Because to be angry about the things that don't matter, or like Jesus, to bring about healing and restoration that God so desperately wants for his world, there's lots of things to complain about, and there are lots of people who need help. But I want us to be beautifully angry. I want us to leave a trail of love and peace in our wake because we're so mad. I want us to bring healing and restoration wherever we go because we're beautifully angry. Let's pray. God, for those who have been looking for a fight because they're not in one, would you give them a fight worth fighting, something big, something glorious? God, we want to change the adjectives. I pray for those who have a sense that they have everything. They have the house and the car and the stuff, and honestly, it's a bit empty. Would you spark a divine anger in them for them to do something of purpose, to make a difference in this world? We want to be like Jesus in the synagogue. Give us a vision of something bigger than ourselves and what we can do about it. Would you speak to us? Amen.